All right, folks, we are here for another episode of Internal Budget. This is episode 65 of the podcast. If only there were a famous Ottawa senator who wore number 65 that we could name the episode after. Well, maybe it'll come to me after. Anyways, not too much time to delay today. It's the day of the NHL draft coming out on Friday. We got Graeme Nichols on the show. How you doing, man?
Not too bad. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. So I think the big news that everybody is talking about for the Senators is losing Joey Daccord to the Seattle Kraken in the expansion draft. I got to say, man, this one caught me off guard a bit. I have been pounding the drum that I thought Joey Daccord was safe from expansion. I thought Seattle would certainly opt for a forward. They didn't. Were you surprised by the Kraken taking Daccord?
I'm not really surprised that the Kraken took Daccord just simply because he was one of the few young players who could have been made available to them, right? I think, maybe if Logan Brown slipped through, maybe that would have been a possibility as well. But just on paper of the guys who were available, I thought Abramov and Daccord were the two who had a little bit of unfulfilled upside that they just haven't played enough games at the NHL level to prove what they can do consistently. But just for that alone, I know Evgeny Dadonov is being thrown back in is a bit of a wrinkle, and he's a guy who's had a lot of success at the NHL level for a number of years. But you look at his age, salary, the likelihood of diminished returns, and to me it just made sense. You get a young, controllable asset, Joey Daccord, who's waiver exempt next season. He's someone you can plug in the minors, and in the event of an injury, he can step in and play. And who knows, right? He's only 24 years old, I believe, or maybe he just turned 25. So maybe there is a little bit of more unfulfilled upside. And Daccord's had success at every level, whether it's NCAA, the ECHL, the AHL, or I thought he had some really nice moments last year in Ottawa. He looked like an athletic goaltender who can make some stops, and he looked like a guy who would battle, and his teammates seem to have loved him. The fans here, despite the player only being here for a short period of time, seems to have really gravitated towards his personality. He just seems like a genuinely good dude. So it's a bit of a painful loss in that sense, because you never want to lose a young player that who's been sitting in the minors for a while, developing, and to lose him without netting an asset in return is kind of a blow. But at the same time, you look at Ottawa's goaltending depth and the prospects that they've accrued, and the possibility that they could select another one with their 10th overall pick this year. And if Ottawa takes a Jesper Wallstedt in the first round this year, I don't think people will be too worried about Joey Daccord.
No, you got to think Pierre Dorian is super unhappy about how everything shook out, though. I mean, he exposed his Dadonov and Tierney, hoping that at least one of them is going to get taken off the books for free, and instead he loses one of his top prospects. But I think the Ottawa crease situation is going to be really interesting next year. You've got Matt Murray, who's looking for a bounce back season again, looked solid towards the end of the year before getting hurt again. You got Anton Forsberg back in the mix. Philip Gustafsson showed that he's a capable everyday NHLer, at least for now. So I think, it's tough to say what the roster is going to look like given any kind of COVID flexibility that remains. But do you see Gustafsson kind of pushing for a spot in Ottawa next year, maybe ending up as Murray's backup, or do you think he's spending the entire year in Belleville now that Daccord's out of the mix?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And who knows how it'll shake out, right? Injuries, It seems like every year Ottawa's goaltending duo gets solidified, an injury happens and a wrench gets thrown in the mix, and some guy that you've never really anticipated being in the picture takes center stage and runs with it a little bit. We've had guys like Mike Condon and Andrew Hammond's come out of the blue, and there's always been kind of a guy like that. And I think, Gustafsson looked great last year. I think he's a young goaltender who's really athletic, and he's just square to the shooter. And that was just something that was sorely needed. Watching Matt Murray play last year, I was kind of, obviously we've all watched Pittsburgh play over the years, especially against Ottawa in the postseason and stuff. But I didn't realize how unathletic Matt Murray would look when you watch him that consistently. And I was just kind of shocked and taken back a little bit at times last year, saying I know you shouldn't judge a guy based off his lowest moments. I think last season in Ottawa was probably some of his lowest moments as a professional goaltender, but I was just kind of taken aback at where his game was at. And maybe it's a confidence issue. Maybe it's just new team, new coach, new expectations. You're the guy, you've got a new big extension signed, and maybe there's some pressures that go with that. And, I think everybody should give him the benefit of the doubt and an opportunity next season to prove that he can handle the number one reins. But I think, if he gets off to a bad start, it's going to put a lot of pressure on Anton Forsberg. And, you know, like he's been a number 3 goaltender who's bounced around consistently over the years. And he doesn't have a great track record, although he played really well last year in Ottawa. So injuries happen all the time with goaltenders. I don't even know if Ottawa will carry 3 goaltenders.
Yeah,
that's the other wrinkle, right? Like we have no idea how it's going to shape up really. So it wouldn't shock me at all if Gustafson's here, but you know, you look at the AHL level, Matt Sogard played really well last year in Belleville. And if he keeps tracking the way he's tracking, like Gustafson might have to fight for some games down there as well. So it's just, there's so much internal competition, and it's just such a great spot to be in. And if these kids can push each other to get better and push the other ones to be better and just support each other through the process, I think it's exciting, right?
Mm-hmm. I think Murray, to your point about looking unathletic, that was one of the differences I noticed at the end of the year when he was starting to play well. He racked up a couple shutouts. He just looked like he was moving a little more fluid, like he was tracking the puck a little bit better. Maybe that's the Zach Burke effect. Maybe it's just a matter of him getting healthy, but we're going to see next year when that firepower comes back to the Atlantic Division. Speaking of firepower, or maybe more appropriately lack thereof, I do want to talk about Evgeny Dadonov because he's been a subject of a ton of conjecture over the past few weeks. I have been vocal in my belief that exposing him was a mistake. I think he is a prime bounce back candidate at a salary that's, you know, not ideal, but it's palatable, at least for this year. But what were your thoughts on Dorian exposing him? And do you think he's going to end up in Ottawa again in October?
You know what? My first thoughts on Dorian exposing him are, I know a lot of people like to spin the argument that it was like, why did we protect Austin Watson, a 4th line player, over Evgeny Dadonov? And, you know, like if you're just looking at it through that lens, to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense. You're protecting a 4th line player who doesn't have a lot of projectable upside over a guy who scored 25 plus goals on 3 separate occasions, right? Mm-hmm. And, you know, he's had success recently, Dadonov. So just in that lens alone, I think, you can get a little bit disappointed and be a little surprised with how it kind of unraveled here a little bit. But at the same time, you know, I think it is a little bit more nuanced, right? Like Dadonov is commanding a big salary. He's making $5 million this season. He's going to make 6.5 the next. Like, if you have an opportunity to get out from under that contract and reallocate that money towards guys who you believe can be better players, then like I can totally understand that argument. But at the same time, in saying that, it's really, really easy to say, hey, go spend that money on a better player. But it's another to actually make that dream come to fruition. So I don't know. It's interesting because when I first saw Dadonov get moved, I'm thinking, okay, Ottawa has a move in mind that they would like to make. Maybe they have a back pocket deal where they can bring in a player right away to fill that kind of void and out just to reallocate that money. But, you know, now that he went through the expansion process and was never picked, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Like, you know, Ottawa has been linked to players like Ryan Strome. Are they still going to be linked to players, you know, commanding like $4.5-5 million a year? Or now that Dadonov's staying, or is Ottawa going to be like bargain shopping again? Mm-hmm. So it's certainly an interesting dynamic. And I totally agree with you. I think like Dadonov's a perfect candidate to bounce back. I think people look at him last season and they say, well, he scored 0 goals on the power play and only had 1 power play assist. Like, he's garbage. He's not a good player. But I think if you watched him play, the one thing that surprised me last year is that he didn't seem like, for a guy who put up like 25 goals and 60 plus points on a few times, like, he just didn't seem like the dynamic kind of player who creates those kinds of points. But it's no fault of his own, right? Not everybody's a flashy player. I think what it shows is that he just needs to find his spot. He needs the puck in certain spots to get his goals. And I think if you watch his highlights of Florida, Huberdeau was very good at finding that. And I think when he was on the ice last year, even though he might not necessarily put up the points that a lot of people were anticipating, he also didn't hurt the team at all when he was on the ice. And there's something to be said about an offensive player who doesn't kill you defensively as well. And his possession numbers were fine, scoring chance data, everything else was on par. Like, he was more favorable. He was more of a net positive than a net negative.
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, he actually put up his best expected goals against number of his career last year. Yeah. And, you know, and that's the other thing I kind of wanted to touch on is, in terms of deployment, it seemed like he almost had a shorter leash than everybody else from DJ Smith. I mean, this is a guy who, like you mentioned, is a perennial 25 goal scorer, former 70-point guy, and he got like 1 or 2 looks on the top line all year. So maybe the coach sees something he doesn't like, but I don't know, man. Like the whole thing is strange to me. I'm really curious to see what's going to happen now that Zach Hyman looks like he's going to get locked up in Edmonton for that dog's breakfast of a contract. Because I really thought if the Senators were going to move on from Dadonov, that was probably the plan, was to take a hard run at Hyman. I mean, we talked about it a little bit, but if they do move on from him and they flip him for whatever they can get, like who do you see them bringing in to fill that right wing spot? Because that's a thin position now.
Like there are some guys who are out there, right? Like Connor Garland's a guy out of Arizona, I think is I think he would be a great fit on Ottawa's third line. And, maybe you could even go out and grab a line mate like Michael Bunting as well and have that kind of boy the bottom six for the Senators. But you're right. Like it's not a great situation trying to find replacements for Dadonov if you have to move on. But it certainly puts a lot of pressure on Connor Brown. Having another like bounce. But like, I think the thing with Connor Brown is like he's always had those individual, like he creates a ton of individual chances, and you watch him play, he generates it through hard work, back checking. His motor's really, really strong, and he generates a lot of his own chances just off his sheer work alone. And I think last year in the second half of the season, like all the chances that he would generate just started going in. And you watch him in the first half of the season, it was almost like watching Eric Condra at times. Where you're like, oh God, if this guy would just bury like 30% more of his chances, like he'd be phenomenal. And he started to, and it's great to see like a player who's that good, who finally has some good luck go his way. Like it was a lot of fun to see, and it certainly makes the contract that he signed with Ottawa look a hell of a lot better than what Zach Hyman just got in Edmonton. So, but there's going to be a lot of pressure on him next season, right? He's got to prove that he can get, eclipse the 20 goal threshold again, and prove that he can play in a top 6 capacity. And I think having some familiarity with DJ Smith has kind of entrenched him and put him in a little bit of a higher regard than a Dadonov, right? It just seems like it earns him a little bit more leeway, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's just one of the wrinkles that Dadonov's is going to have to overcome when it comes to his usage.
Yeah, I mean, a guy in Connor Brown who maybe played a bit over his head in terms of production at least. But you and I have both written articles recently, actually, about the Senators' search for a number 1 center, as Eugene Melnyk put it, even though I think Jack Eichel is probably the only bona fide number 1 center on the market this year. But we've heard the names tossed around, Ryan Strome and Nazem Kadri and Christian Dvorak. I personally, now that the Dvorak rumblings have kind of started, I don't know how much there is to them, but I think he would be a fantastic fit. He's really good in both ends of the ice. He can score. He's good on the power play. I think if you're talking about maybe putting him on a second line with Tim Stützle, at least for now, there might be something there. But of the guys whose names have been tossed around, and maybe even somebody off the board, who do you think would be a fit for Ottawa going into this October?
It's kind of ironic. I'll just segue this. It's kind of ironic that we're like 1 year removed from like Jean-Gabriel Pageau leaving, where it's like, oh my God, we got to find it. We got to find a center. And it's like all these guys are kind of coming in at the same price level as Pageau. So like, I'm not saying we should have kept him by any means, but it's just kind of funny and ironic how like a year later, it's like, oh, we need a veteran presence to help shelter these guys. It's like, well, you guys literally just punted one off the roster, and he's doing fairly well in Long Island. So
it was a monster return, though. It's hard to feel bad about that trade.
Oh, I know. And it's all revisionist history and stuff. It's just funny, right? But
yeah.
But yeah, like you're right. Like Nazem Kadri, I think the problem with a lot of the guys that Ottawa has been linked to thus far, they're all kind of like 28, 29, 30 years of age, right? And many of them are on short-term deals. And I think Ottawa could use a center. I also think they could stand pat with Shane Pinto, Colin White, and Josh Norris and be totally fine next year.
Yeah.
But the problem is, and I mentioned this on another podcast the other day, is that we're having the same conversation now about Shane Pinto that we had last year with Josh Norris. And I know Shane Pinto didn't play in the AHL for a full season. He doesn't have that professional experience necessarily under his belt yet. But at the same time, he looked pretty damn good in that small sample size of games that we saw at the end of last season. And Colin White's a guy who's played in the top 6 with Mark Stone and Brady Tkachuk. Like, he's good defensively. He's not going to kill you. You might put up modest offensive point totals, but he's a guy who also scored 20 goals at 1.2, right?
Yeah.
And I think they could do worse. But at the same time, with a lot of these guys like Strome and Kadri, like, do you really want a short-term guy? Do you really want to spend a considerable opportunity cost to bring in another, like, kind of like Derek Stepan kind of player? I'm not saying that he's going to have a bad year like Stepan had, but the danger of that is if a guy gets hurt or if a guy underperforms or whatever, like, that deal could blow up in your face. And I just think for where Ottawa is in their development, I think they'd almost be better getting someone who's here on a multi-year deal, who's a little bit younger, who can fit with the core, who you could easily flip to someone else if Shane Pinto proves he's good. And, you know, like, Dylan Strome's a guy who I mentioned a few times who's just maybe a little bit undervalued in Chicago because he's coming off a bad year, but he's a guy who's had success. The underlying numbers are strong. He's 23, I believe, or 24. So he's a little bit younger, and he's a guy that might show you something. And I just don't. I know Otto keeps talking about we want to get a veteran center in here and everything else. It's just for what teams probably want for a lot of the guys that are on the market. I probably wouldn't pay that price if I'm Ottawa. No. I'd rather just hold on to the picks and then see where the team's at this year. You know, you're going back to the Atlantic Division after their experience or experiment in the North Division last year, and I think, you know, here's a chance for you to actually measure your team up against the Tampa Bays, the Floridas, the Bostons, the Montreals, the teams that actually finished and did relatively well in the postseason. And it could be more of a measuring stick year for the organization. I think, you know, there's a lot of pressure on the young kids to grow and perform, but I wouldn't write Shane Pinto off.
No, definitely not.
That's just kind of how I feel about it. And I think, I don't know how the organization feels about Colin White, but I think you could do worse as a third line center.
Yeah, I do too. I like Colin White in the bottom six. The Pinto thing's interesting for me because I know the comparisons to Norris are inevitable, like you said, but I just think banking on that guy after he played 8 NHL games or whatever it was at the end of the season, I don't love that. I don't feel like it's a sure bet. And it wouldn't be the worst thing for him to spend a year in Belleville, or at least the bulk of the year in Belleville, playing top line minutes, get that professional experience, round out his game a little more. And you can say the same thing about his UND compatriot JBD. But in hearing what you were saying about the criteria that they should be looking at for a center, to me, if he is in fact available, Dvorak hits all those boxes for me. He's 25. He's locked in for 4 more years at $4.45 million. I mean, the only thing that maybe will put the Senators off a bit is he out earns his cap hit in the final 2 years. His base salary is 5.7 in his last 2 years. And we all know how the Senators feel about deals like that, at least given their actions. Right. But that's a guy I like. I mean, I don't know how much you've watched the player over the last few years. I don't know how big of an Arizona Coyotes fan or follower you are.
Just the 1 or 2 games a year.
Exactly.
That's it.
When they wear the Kachina jerseys, I watch them. But is that a guy you could see being a fit?
Maybe. So essentially that takes him to his UFA years, right? So he's 25 now. He's got 4 years left. Maybe. It just seems like
he signed to the years of unparalleled success. That's the important thing.
And that's it. If he doesn't perform at the level that you're anticipating, then you're put in a position where he could wind up eating some of those dollars, right? And I know the organization has said numerous times under Melnick in the last little bit that, hey, we'll spend the cap when the time's right, and we'll set this team up for the 5 years of unparalleled success. But you got to put the actions to the words. So I don't know. Just the way Ottawa's operated, they haven't shown a huge willingness to spend a lot of extra money. So they've got a lot of young guys coming off ELCs that they got to sign up big deals, and I just don't know if they want to lock up money in that. I just don't know. Is Dvorak's a decent player, but is he a safe bet? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I guess we should pivot to the back end as well, because apparently the Senators are going after a right-handed defenseman. And again, it's the same names that have been thrown around since the beginning. I don't see David Savard coming to Ottawa. I think he's going to get whatever money is left after Dougie Hamilton gets his contract. So probably end up being overpaid. I mean, Adam Larson would have been a good fit, especially at that deal he signed in Seattle. I think that would have been a perfect type of deal. What was it? 4 by 4.6, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there you go. Like that's perfect for the Senators. But I guess what I'm asking, Graham, is who's left?
That's a good question. Yeah, I thought like before the playoffs started, I thought like David Savard would be interesting. He shares an agent with Tom Chabot. He would have been a good fit alongside Chabot. And I think they don't necessarily need like a high end guy.
No,
Because
no, no.
I look at Ottawa's situation. I think ideally you want to have Zub playing with Chabot on the top pair. If you can find someone on the second pair, so you can give Zub more minutes, more responsibility and everything, playing alongside Chabot, I think that's ideal. If you can get Nikita Zaitsev to the third pairing, insulate his minutes a little bit better, I think that would be huge. But you're right, the market is barren and I don't know what they're going to do. And even on the left side, like Pierre Maguire was hired recently and he came in and he says he wants to see pairings where it's like a big guy with a small guy all the time. Yeah. And I look at Ottawa and I see Victor Mete and I see Eric Brandstrom potentially filling the bottom four spots on the left side. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Senators go out and try and get a bigger left defenseman as well, someone that they can plug in there for certain matchups and everything else. And it's going to be interesting because those guys cost money and Ottawa's got to make room for them. So I'm really intrigued to see what they do because they definitely do need some back end help. And I have a hard time seeing them going into the season with what they have on paper.
Yeah. And and maybe their hesitance to play Zub on that top pairing comes from the size thing, right? Like he's not an overly big guy. I think it's a waste of assets to try to go get a guy on the left side. I mean, you've got Brandstrom, you've got Mate's already there. You got Sanderson coming. Like, I mean, the right side is the clear focus to me. Like there is a major drop off from Artem Zub to Nikita Zaitsev to Josh Brown.
But what do you do if Bernard Daccord has a really strong camp?
Well, you got to play him, right?
Well, do you though? Because I don't know. It seems like they like to put their guys in the AHL, let them marinate for a little bit, which doesn't hurt them, right? Like It never hurts a prospect to spend a little bit more time in Belleville under man. But there's some opportunity, and the only thing is, whether it's Pinto or Jacob Bernard Daccord, you just don't want to see these prospects get blocked out by a veteran placeholder who's just playing ineffectively. Yeah. I think that's a concern a lot of the time, right? Like if these guys are ready to play, put them in. Don't worry about the veterans. Just let them play. Like I don't think if you ask fans at the end of last season if they want to endure another season where you're watching guys like Cedric Paquette play like 30 plus games or whatever, they're going to shake their head. They're saying we didn't sign up for that. Like let the kids play and develop. And I think that's what a lot of people are looking forward to this year.
Yeah. I mean, I think Bernard Docker's probably in tough just coming into camp. Like, I mean, they sat him in the press box for like however many games after he signed, right? I don't get some of the way they've managed some of these players, but to that end, I think if a lot of problems are solved if Shane Pinto and Jacob Bernard Docker show up to camp as bona fide NHL players. I don't know how likely that is, or how likely the Senators are to put their faith in them right away. But I think that is, I mean, that's just gravy at that point, right? But with the draft tonight, when this episode comes out, I guess we should kind of pivot a little bit before we run out of time here. What direction do you see the Senators going in? I mean, the 10th pick is really interesting because I think it's dependent on a couple of key guys falling a little lower than they perhaps should. I think we all thought that if the Senators were eyeing Jesper Wallstedt, they'd probably be blocked on that front by the Detroit Red Wings and the Los Angeles Kings. But now you have the Red Wings trading for Alex Nedeljkovic. So my guess would be that they're not going to draft a goaltender with their pick. Where do you see Ottawa going? Are we talking Cole Sillinger? Are we talking Mason McTavish? Do they go at the goalie?
It's fascinating. Like on my own podcast, I was talking to Scott Wheeler and I talked to Will Scouch, and there's just even though there's consensus on who like the top 15, top 20 guys in this draft shall be, it seems like you look at the dynamics and the consensus rankings that are out there, there's just so much fluidity, right? Like you have the guy who gets taken first could wind up be taken sixth on some other boards. It's just, I haven't seen this much action in terms of where guys could slide in years.
Yeah.
And I think that just from an Ottawa perspective, sitting at 10, you're kind of, it's just kind of gravy at this point, right? Like, it's almost like there's no pressure. Like there's absolutely no pressure. It to me, in a way, it's almost like reminiscent of last year's draft when Ottawa was picking third, right?
Yeah.
You know, like the Rangers and the Kings had so much pressure on them to nail their picks, because if you miss out on the guy who goes third and he winds up being the best of the lot, well, revisionist history says people are going to rip you for it.
Yeah.
Whereas Ottawa, you just pick whoever slides to you, and it's easy. And I think this year, drafting 10, I think it's going to be more of the same. You know, you mentioned some names. Like Mason McTavish is a local product. He's played a lot, plays center, plays a hard two-way game. He'd be interesting, I think, just based off the local connections. He kind of has that style that the Senators seem to value a lot, like the safe floor two-way center. Mind you, at the same time, like Ottawa's picked a lot of safe floor guys over the last like 2-3 years. So maybe they roll the dice and go for skill, more high-end skill, maybe like a Liesel or someone else. But it's just gonna be fascinating to just kind of watch where guys fall. And if the Senators take a goaltender because they lost Joey Daccord, then that's what they're gonna do. I can't blame them. Like if they believe that there's a true number one goalie out there, like I'm not gonna be disappointed that they took them. I'll be a little bit surprised, but I don't like, it seems like they trade up to get a goaltender every year. So it would hardly be a surprise whatsoever. But I think, you know, if we're talking about Wallstedt and looking at the picks that Ottawa's accrued over the years, it kind of, it's funny to me because you spend a lot of draft pick capital moving up to get guys like Sogard. You target Philip Gustafson in a trade. And to me, the goaltending landscape is just so fascinating because there's so much movement, and the guy that you like yesterday might not be the guy you like a year from now or 2 years from now. And it seems with Ottawa, it's kind of always been like that. They just keep accruing more and more depth, and the pecking order just changes all the time.
Interesting too that another guy with NHL pedigree and Cole Sillinger might fall to them, because they seem to like that. I mean, Pierre Dorian, I recall last year, kind of denied that was a factor into their drafting decisions. But I mean, come on, like we're talking Jake Sanderson and Norris and Batherson, like it's Kachuk. Like the proof is kind of in the pudding here.
And you can, anytime you have the chance to draft the old time Senators great Mike Sillinger's kid, you have to do it.
Yes, absolutely.
But Sillinger's interesting too, because like Will Scouching, like I was just, you know, you go down the rabbit hole, right? You start watching all these YouTube highlight videos that everybody watches, and like Cole Sillinger's, you're like, man, this guy can shoot it and rip it. And then I post on Twitter, I'm like, yeah, I'm watching a Cole Sillinger video. And then, you know, someone reached out to me. They're like, oh, you should totally watch Will Scouch's a video on Cole Sillinger. I'm like, all right, yeah, sure. So I go down that rabbit hole and it leads you to that. And you kind of see how this guy does a lot of stuff individually within the offensive zone, and it just raises some questions. Whereas, you know, it's just, you're kind of building like the most complete picture of a prospect you can before you arrive at any conclusions. And I thought it was really, really interesting. So if anybody hasn't watched it yet, go to scouting.ca or go to Will Scouch's YouTube channel and check it out, because it's super interesting how he uses like data tracking to kind of add little scouting elements to some of the top prospects being considered in the top 10.
And they've and the Senators have taken the bird in the hand is worth two in the bush approach, right? I mean, there were a lot of people who were going last year, why are you drafting a left-handed defenseman at number 5 when you have all these guys in the pipeline? But I mean, it proved to be kind of prophetic, because Christian Wolanin is in Los Angeles now, and Eric Brandstrom's finally starting to come into his own. So I don't think they'll shy away from taking a center at number 10, even though they have guys like Ridley Gregg and Shane Pinto who are kind of getting to the point where they're ready to step in. In terms of moving picks, Dorian alluded to today to the fact that they might try to move back into the first round with one of their second rounders. Like, I don't know what the likelihood of that is, just, you know, based on who might be willing to trade a pick. But who do you think they're going to target if they perhaps get into the late first round with one of their seconds?
Oh, it's a good question. I don't even, like, you talk about positional need and stuff too, and I don't know where a lot of positional need is for the Senators, right? Like, it'd be nice if they got like a really skilled center. It'd be nice if they had like another right winger, maybe, because I think like after Sokolov on the right side, it's pretty barren. Like Drake Batherson's graduated obviously off the prospect list and stuff. So maybe right wing, right defense. I think they could probably use another guy. But you talked about the 2 second round picks. It's Ottawa, when they get to the second round, they've been drafting a lot of guys who project to be like third line players, like almost like middle six is their upside and stuff. And they've never really rolled the dice on a lot of high end skill, especially like early on, right? They like their safe floor guys. So it's going to be kind of fascinating, especially in a draft like this, right? Like the OHL did not play this season. You didn't have extended opportunities to watch a lot of these kids play across every country. So for guys who have late birthdays, who are late bloomers, there's the real opportunity for a lot of good players to kind of slip through the cracks a little bit and slide, whether that's the second round, the third round, the fourth round, like more so than any other year. I think just the effects of the pandemic could have huge ramifications on guys like sleepers falling to the later rounds. And I think it's going to be fun to look back at Ottawa's situation because they're a small scouting staff, right? Like they're not a big staff, and it's just, how are they going to deal with what happened? Is it going to benefit? Everybody loves their amateur scouting staff, and I don't think you'll have a hard time finding people who would knock it. But it's going to be really interesting to sit back like 2 or 3 years from now and see kind of like, all right, what organizations did what, who did really well, who didn't do well, why is that? And it's kind of going to be fascinating to see what Ottawa's doing. And they have a lot of, like, Ottawa has a ton of picks. I think they have 11 picks in 2022, right? And that's supposed to be a really strong draft. So maybe this is the year where they like start swinging for the fences. And to me, if that's what they do, I'm all for it, man. Like go after the big boomer bust prospects and then take a shot. I think it's about time Ottawa took their shot.
Agreed. Graeme Nichols, it's been a pleasure having you. Before I let you go, really quickly, what's Brady Tkachuk's next contract going to be?
3 years, I'll say 19 and a half.
So are you talking like 7 million AAV roughly?
I'd say 6.5.
6.5. Ooh, that'd be on the low end. I think you're going.
So I don't know. I think they'll give him his bridge deal, and I don't think the AAV will be as high as people expect it to be.
Yeah, well, that'd be good for a Senators team that operates on something of an internal budget. Folks, gnichols.substack.com. Check out the Ottawa Senators newsletter, Rome in a Day. It is fantastic stuff. You're not going to find much better coverage anywhere else. That's it for this episode of Internal Budget. Thank you so much for listening. Enjoy the NHL draft festivities tonight, and we will see you for another episode next week. Take care, everybody.